There is a question most men never allow themselves to ask. Not because it is difficult, but because the answer might demand everything they have been avoiding. Here it is. When your life ends, what evidence will exist that you were here? Not what you owned, not what you accumulated, not the titles you held or the rooms you occupied. Evidence. Proof that your time on earth produced something that outlasted the hours you spent breathing. Most lives vanish without a sound. Not because the people were weak or foolish, but because they lived reactively. They responded to the world, but never shaped it. They filled their days with motion, but left behind no direction. And when the final moment came, there was nothing to continue. No momentum, no structure, no legacy. Let me be clear. Legacy is not fame. It is not wealth. It is not being remembered by strangers. Legacy is influence that persists after you are gone. Influence over thought, behavior, principles, decisions. It is the continuation of what you stood for, practiced, and became. And it is not built in the final chapter of your life. It is constructed daily, in disciplines so quiet they seem irrelevant until 20 years have passed. I have studied the patterns of men who left something behind. Not monuments, meaning, not noise, order. And I have also studied those who disappeared without echo. The difference is not luck. It is not opportunity. It is daily decision. Specifically, it is the decision to do certain things every single day, regardless of mood, circumstance, or visible reward. This is not motivational theory. This is architectural law. Your life is being built right now, whether you are directing the construction or not. The question is not whether you will leave something behind. You will. The question is whether it will be intentional or accidental, ordered or chaotic, meaningful or forgettable. Here is what most men misunderstand. They believe legacy is the result of extraordinary achievement. In truth, legacy is the result of ordinary discipline extended over extraordinary time. The man who governs himself today builds the foundation. The man who serves without applause plants invisible seeds. The man who clarifies his direction every morning prevents years of wandering. The man who pushes past comfort every day expands his capacity to the point where life must take notice. These are not inspirational ideas. These are daily requirements. And if you adopt them, something begins to happen that you cannot fake, force, or simulate. You change, not your circumstances first, you. And when you change deeply enough, consistently enough, your presence begins to shift the atmosphere around you. People trust you without knowing why. Opportunities align without announcement. Your words carry weight because your life carries coherence. This does not happen because you wished for it. It happens because you obeyed laws that govern growth, influence, and continuation. Laws that do not negotiate, do not pause, and do not care whether you believe in them. They simply operate. And the man who aligns himself with them compounds quietly while others complain loudly. What I am about to share with you are 4 daily acts. Not goals, not ambitions. Acts. Things you do today, tomorrow, and every day after until they become who you are. These acts are not dramatic. They will not impress the crowd. But they will separate you from the men who are replaced and place you among the men who are remembered. Before I go further, you must ask yourself one question. Am I willing to live deliberately, or am I content to live by default? Because once you understand these disciplines, you will no longer have the excuse of ignorance. You will only have the choice of obedience or neglect. And that choice, repeated across decades, will determine whether your name means something or simply marks a grave. Listen now, not for entertainment, but for instruction. Because the life you leave behind is being shaped right now. And what you do daily is writing a story that others will either retell or forget. Take command of your thought before the day takes command of you. Legacy begins in a place most men never inspect, the interior landscape of their own minds. A man who does not govern his thoughts will spend his entire life executing the agendas of others. He will be busy, perhaps even successful by certain measures, but he will not be autonomous. And a man who is not autonomous cannot leave a legacy. He can only leave a record of responsiveness. Let me say this plainly. If you wake up and immediately absorb the world's agenda, the news, the notifications, the demands, the noise, you have already surrendered the day. You have permitted external forces to set the tone, the pace, and the priorities of your internal world. And once the tone is set, it is nearly impossible to reclaim. This is not about avoiding information. This is about sequence. The disciplined man decides the order of influence. He establishes his inner posture before the outer world speaks. He chooses his mental direction before circumstance suggests one. This is not withdrawal. This is sovereignty. I call this the principle of mental first position. It means you occupy your own mind before anything else does. You decide what thoughts are allowed residency. You evaluate which ideas deserve attention and which deserve expulsion. This is not suppression. This is selection. And it is the foundation of every legacy worth studying. Consider the mechanics of thought for a moment. Your mind is constantly receiving input, sensory data, emotional signals, memories, projections, fears, desires. Most of this input is involuntary. You did not choose to hear the car horn or recall the argument from last week. But here is the critical point. You do choose what you do with that input once it arrives. You can rehearse it, amplify it, build a narrative around it, or you can acknowledge it and let it pass. That choice is where power lives. Ungoverned thought becomes habit. Habit becomes character. Character becomes destiny. This is not philosophy. This is sequence. And the sequence begins with a single thought that you either rule or are ruled by. Most men are ruled. They do not think, they react. They do not decide, they respond. And by the end of their lives, they have never once lived from the inside out. They have only reflected the outside in. Great men understood this. Abraham Lincoln did not speak in the heat of emotion. He wrote letters he never sent. He forced himself to wait until the reactive impulse passed and reason could speak. That delay was not weakness. It was mastery. It was the refusal to let a single uncontrolled thought escape into action and alter the course of history. His discipline over thought gave him command over moment. And that command shaped the future of a nation. Andrew Carnegie built an empire, but he built it first in the architecture of his mind. He refused to entertain resentment. He would not rehearse insult. He deliberately redirected his attention toward coordination, harmony, and construction. While others burned energy on grievance, he invested it in organization. His success was not a result of talent alone. It was a result of thought management practiced daily over decades. This is the law. What you permit to occupy your mind will eventually occupy your life. If you allow fear to rehearse disaster, disaster becomes familiar. Here is what most men misunderstand. They believe legacy is the result of extraordinary achievement. In truth, legacy is the result of ordinary discipline extended over extraordinary time. The man who governs himself today builds the foundation. The man who serves without applause plants invisible seeds. The man who clarifies his direction every morning prevents years of wandering. The man who pushes past comfort every day expands his capacity to the point where life must take notice. These are not inspirational ideas. These are daily requirements. And if you adopt them, something begins to happen that you cannot fake, force, or simulate. You change, not your circumstances first, you. And when you change deeply enough, consistently enough, Your presence begins to shift the atmosphere around you. People trust you without knowing why. Opportunities align without announcement. Your words carry weight because your life carries coherence. This does not happen because you wished for it. It happens because you obeyed laws that govern growth, influence, and continuation. Laws that do not negotiate, do not pause, and do not care whether you believe in them. They simply operate. And the man who aligns himself with them compounds quietly while others complain loudly. What I am about to share with you are 4 daily acts. Not goals, not ambitions. Acts. Things you do today, tomorrow, and every day after until they become who you are. These acts are not dramatic. They will not impress the crowd, but they will separate you from the men who are replaced and place you among the men who are remembered. Before I go further, you must ask yourself one question. Am I willing to live deliberately, or am I content to live by default? Because once you understand these disciplines, you will no longer have the excuse of ignorance. If you allow resentment to replay injustice, injustice becomes your identity. If you allow drift to fill your mental space, drift becomes your trajectory. The mind does not distinguish between what you choose and what you tolerate. It simply builds with whatever material you provide. So here is the daily act. Before you engage the world, engage yourself. Before you read the news, read your purpose. Before you answer the phone, answer the question, what am I building today? This is not ritual for the sake of ritual. This is calibration. You are setting the frequency at which you will operate. And if you do not set it, the world will set it for you. I recommend this practice. Spend the first minutes of your day in silence, not to escape, but to establish. Ask yourself 3 questions. What is my aim today? What thoughts will I not entertain? What standard will I hold regardless of circumstance? Write the answers if you must. Speak them aloud if it helps. But establish them before the day establishes you. This is not meditation in the mystical sense. This is governance. You are conducting what I call a mental census, a daily inventory of what is allowed to remain in your mind and what must be removed. Every thought that enters is either useful or corrosive. There is no neutral category. And the man who does not actively choose accumulates toxicity by default. You may think this sounds exhausting. It is not. What is exhausting is living at the mercy of every mood, every trigger, every headline, every opinion. That is exhausting because it is endless. But when you govern your mind daily, you reduce the mental noise to a whisper. You no longer fight 1,000 small battles. You fight one battle, the battle for inner authority. And once you win that battle consistently, everything else simplifies. Here is what happens when you practice this daily. Your decisions become clearer. Your emotions become steadier. Your presence becomes heavier. People notice, even if they cannot name what they are noticing. They sense that you are not easily moved, not easily provoked, not easily distracted. They begin to trust you because you appear internally aligned. And that trust, over time, becomes influence. This is not charisma. Charisma is performance. This is coherence. Coherence is alignment between inner state and outer action. And coherence cannot be faked. It can only be built through daily obedience to mental law. Let me be direct. If you do not govern your mind each morning, someone else will govern it for you. The algorithm will govern it. The news cycle will govern it. The complaint of a coworker will govern it. And by the end of the day, you will be exhausted, not because you worked hard, but because you fought battles that were not yours to fight. The man who takes command of his thought first takes command of his day. The man who takes command of his day takes command of his week. The man who takes command of his week takes command of his year. And the man who takes command of his years leaves behind something that does not dissolve when his body does. So before you check your phone, check yourself. Before you consume information, establish intention. Before the world speaks, you speak. And what you speak to yourself, quietly and consistently, will determine what the world hears from you, loudly and permanently. This is the first daily act. It is not glamorous. It is not trending, but it is foundational. And without it, every other effort is built on sand. Serve without scorekeeping. Legacy is not the result of what you took. It is the result of what you gave when no one was tallying. The world remembers contributors, not collectors. It remembers those who made things better, not those who made things louder. And contribution, real contribution, is a daily discipline that most men abandon the moment it stops returning immediate reward. Let me dismantle a dangerous myth. Service is not sacrifice. Service is investment. Every act of usefulness you render without demand, every problem you solve without credit, every burden you lift without announcement. These are not charitable gestures. They are strategic deposits into an account that compounds silently and pays dividends you cannot predict but will eventually depend on. Most men approach life transactionally. They measure output against input. They ask, "What will I get for this?" before they ask, "What can I improve here?" And that question, asked first and asked often, keeps them small. Because transaction has a ceiling. You can only extract as much as you negotiate. But contribution has no ceiling. You can add value indefinitely, and the world has no choice but to respond proportionally over time. I have watched men of extraordinary talent remain invisible because they served only when the terms were clear. And I have watched men of ordinary ability rise to positions of influence because they served first and negotiated never. The difference was not skill. It was orientation. One group asked what they could get. The other group asked what they could give. And the second group, without exception, inherited what the first group spent lifetimes chasing. Here is the law. Usefulness creates necessity. When you make yourself useful consistently, you make yourself necessary eventually. Not through manipulation, not through politics, through reliability. People begin to lean on you because you have proven, through daily action, that you can be leaned on. And once you become a point of stability in a chaotic world, you are no longer replaceable. You are structural. Let me give you a framework. Every day, you encounter small opportunities to be useful. A colleague needs clarity. A neighbor needs help. A family member needs patience. A stranger needs direction. Most people walk past these moments because there is no visible return. No applause. No credit. No transaction. But the disciplined man sees these moments differently. He sees them as repetitions. And repetition, over time, builds identity. When you serve daily without measuring return, you are training two things simultaneously. First, you are training the world to associate you with reliability. Second, you are training yourself to find satisfaction in contribution rather than recognition. That second training is more valuable than the first because it makes you immune to the emotional dependency that destroys most men, the need for external validation. Consider the young assistant who stays late to organize files no one asked him to organize. He is not doing this for thanks. He is doing this because disorder offends him and order serves everyone. That posture, practiced daily, transforms him. Within months, people begin to trust his judgment. Within years, they defer to his leadership. Not because he demanded it, but because he demonstrated, through 1,000 small acts, that he cares about outcomes more than optics. This is the law of quiet accumulation. Contribution compounds in silence. You do not see the return today. You may not see it this month, but you will see it. Because the world is not blind. It is slow. It watches longer than you think. It tests longer than you expect. And when it finally decides you are reliable, it gives you access you could never have negotiated. Thomas Edison did not inspire loyalty through wages. He inspired it through shared mission. His assistants worked beyond their contracts because they felt part of something constructive. They were not employees. They were contributors. And that shift in identity changed everything. People will endure hardship willingly when they believe their contribution matters. Money buys compliance. Purpose earns devotion. Now let me address a trap. Some men serve and then grow bitter when the service goes unnoticed. This bitterness is evidence that they were not serving, they were performing. True service does not require an audience. It requires only a standard. The standard is this: I make things better because disorder offends my principles, not because recognition rewards my ego. Bitterness is the death of legacy. A bitter man poisons every relationship he touches. He contaminates the ground where his influence might have grown. Failure can be instructive. Bitterness is only corrosive. And the antidote to bitterness is not positive thinking. It is daily usefulness. When your attention is directed outward toward contribution, it cannot simultaneously spiral inward toward resentment. Let me give you the daily act. Identify one thing you can improve today that no one asked you to improve. Not for credit, not for thanks, not for leverage. Improve it because improvement is your standard. This could be as simple as organizing a shared space, answering a question thoroughly, or completing a task ahead of schedule. The specifics do not matter. The consistency does. When you practice this daily, something shifts. You stop waiting for permission to be excellent. You stop waiting for perfect conditions to contribute. You stop waiting for recognition to act. You become self-initiating. And self-initiating men do not wait for legacy to find them. They build it in plain sight, one unremarkable act at a time. Here is what others will notice, even if they do not articulate it. You do not complain about tasks beneath you. You do not hoard information. You do not withhold effort when no one is watching. You are the same in private as you are in public. That congruence is rare. And rarity, over time, becomes value. This is not about being taken advantage of. This is about being advantageous. When you serve without scorekeeping, you position yourself as indispensable. Not through force, through function. You become the person people cannot afford to lose because losing you would cost them more than keeping you ever did. I will say this clearly. 1 year of consistent, uncredited contribution often repairs what 5 years of self-promotion destroyed. Service restores trust faster than apology. It rebuilds reputation more effectively than explanation. Because service is evidence, and evidence speaks louder than words ever will. Let this principle govern your conduct, not as a suggestion, but as a law you obey even when it costs you. I contribute daily. I serve without measuring return. I improve what I touch because improvement is my standard. When this becomes your internal law, reputation becomes your external result. Not reputation you crafted, reputation you earned. And here is the final truth of this act. The man who serves well is never invisible for long. The world is watching. It is always watching. And when it finally decides to reward you, it will not ask your permission. It will simply open doors you did not know existed and hand you opportunities you never applied for. Not because you were lucky, because you were useful. And usefulness, practiced daily over decades, becomes undeniable. This is the second daily act. Serve without scorekeeping. Contribute without announcement. Improve without applause. And let time do what time always does for the man who made himself useful. Remember him. Reaffirm your direction every morning. Most men do not lose their direction through catastrophe. They lose it through drift. They wake up one day and realize they have been moving, sometimes frantically, but not toward anything coherent. The motion was real. The progress was not. And the years that should have compounded into momentum instead evaporated into regret. Direction is not a decision you make once. It is a commitment you renew daily. Purpose, left unattended, decays. Clarity, left unrehearsed, fades. The mind does not hold intention naturally. It must be reminded. It must be commanded. And the man who does not command his own mind every morning will spend his day executing commands from every other source. I have observed men who once possessed crystal-clear vision drift into confusion simply because they stopped revisiting that vision. They decided once, perhaps with great conviction, what they wanted to build. But they did not repeat that decision. They did not renew it. They assumed the initial choice would carry them forward indefinitely. It did not. And 10 years later, they could not remember why they started or what they were aiming for. This is the law of mental entropy. What is not maintained deteriorates. A garden left untended becomes wilderness. A skill left unpracticed becomes dormant. And a purpose left unrehearsed becomes vague. The disciplined man understands this. He does not trust his memory to hold his mission. He reinforces it daily through deliberate repetition. Let me be specific. Every morning, before the demands arrive, before the urgencies appear, before the distractions multiply, you must state your direction. Not think it vaguely. State it clearly, out loud if necessary. Write it if that helps. But make it explicit. What am I building? What am I becoming? What will I not compromise today? This is not affirmation in the mystical sense. This is alignment. You are calibrating your internal compass. You are reminding your subconscious mind what commands the day. Because the subconscious does not think, it obeys. But it only obeys what is repeated. A single decision is a spark. A repeated decision is fire. And fire, sustained long enough, becomes unstoppable momentum. Henry Ford understood this. He did not change his purpose. He changed his methods 1,000 times, but his purpose remained fixed, accessible transportation for the common man. Every obstacle clarified what he would not abandon. Every failure refined how he would proceed. But the direction never shifted. That constancy saved him from the wandering that destroys most men. Direction is not rigidity. It is axis. You can pivot, adjust, recalibrate tactics, but the axis holds. The man who knows his direction can afford to be flexible in approach because he is immovable in aim. The man who lacks direction cannot afford flexibility because every adjustment feels like abandonment. Here is what happens when you reaffirm direction daily. Opportunities begin to filter themselves. Distractions lose their appeal. You instinctively recognize what aligns with your aim and what does not. This is not intuition in the mystical sense. This is pattern recognition. Your mind, trained daily to focus on a specific target, begins to see pathways others miss and dismiss noise others chase. I call this directional filtering. When your purpose is clear and renewed constantly, your attention becomes selective. You are no longer open to everything. You are open to what serves the direction. This is not closed-mindedness. This is precision. And precision saves decades. Let me contrast two men. The first wakes up and reacts. He checks messages, absorbs news, responds to urgencies. By noon, he has been productive by certain measures, but he has not advanced his purpose 1 inch. He moved, but he did not progress. The second man wakes up and reaffirms. He reminds himself what he is building, what today must accomplish, what he will not tolerate from himself. By noon, he has eliminated half the tasks the first man completed because they were irrelevant to his direction. He moved less, but progressed further. Over 1 day, the difference is negligible. Over 1 year, the difference is visible. Over 10 years, the difference is a different life entirely. The first man is busy. The second man is building. And only the second man leaves something behind. Now let me address fear. Fear is loud when direction is unclear. The mind, uncertain of its aim, amplifies every threat. But when direction is clear and reaffirmed daily, fear quiets. Not because the threats disappeared, but because the mind is occupied with construction rather than speculation. A man who knows where he is going does not have time to rehearse disaster. This is why reaffirming direction is not optional. It is protective. It shields you from the emotional chaos that consumes undirected men. It gives you a reference point when circumstances shift. It allows you to say, with confidence, "This does not serve my aim," and move on without guilt. Here is the daily act. Before you engage the world, declare your direction. One sentence. I am building underscore. Fill in the blank with specificity. I am building a body of work that outlasts me. I am building financial independence through disciplined investment. I am building a family culture of responsibility and growth. The specifics matter less than the clarity, but clarity matters absolutely. When you do this daily, something remarkable happens. Your decisions accelerate. You no longer deliberate endlessly because you have a filter. Does this align with what I am building? If yes, proceed. If no, decline. That simplicity is the gift of renewed direction. It removes the paralysis of endless options and replaces it with the clarity of aligned choice. Others will notice this as well. They will sense that you are not wandering. You are not available for every distraction. You are not persuaded by every trend. You have aim. And aim, especially in a world full of drifters, is magnetic. People trust men who know where they are going, even if the destination is difficult. Certainty attracts cooperation. Uncertainty repels it. Let me say this directly. Indecision is a slow poison. Every time you delay a choice, you train your mind to doubt itself. Every time you hesitate when you should act, you weaken your internal authority. Confidence is not a personality trait. It is the result of repeated decision-making aligned with declared direction. You build confidence by deciding, acting, and reaffirming daily. And here is the final benefit of this practice. When you renew your direction every morning, you do not waste years discovering yourself. You build yourself deliberately. You do not wait for clarity to arrive. You create it through repetition. And by the time others are still searching for purpose, you are already decades into construction. This is the third daily act. Reaffirm your direction every morning. Not because you forgot it, but because your mind needs to be reminded what it serves. Say it clearly. Write it if you must. But establish it before the day establishes you. And let that daily renewal become the compass that prevents a lifetime of wandering. Act 4. Push past comfort daily. Legacy is not what you leave behind. It is who you become before you leave. And who you become is determined entirely by how much resistance you are willing to face daily without retreat. Comfort builds nothing. Comfort preserves what already exists until it decays. Growth requires friction, and friction requires deliberate choice to step beyond what feels easy. Most men spend their lives seeking ease. They believe rest is the reward for effort. And it is, but only after the work is finished. The tragedy is that most men rest before the work begins. They rest during the years they should be expanding. And by the time they realize comfort has eroded their capacity, they no longer have the strength to reclaim it. I have watched comfort destroy more potential than failure ever did. Failure often forces recalibration. It shocks the system into attention. But comfort lulls the spirit into slow decline. It whispers that you have done enough, that you have earned permission to coast, that maintenance is sufficient. And while you listen to that whisper, your capacity shrinks. Not dramatically, quietly. 1 year of comfort, and you lose an edge. 5 years, and you lose range. 10 years, and you lose the man you could have been entirely. This is the law of use or lose. Capacity that is not challenged atrophies. Strength that is not tested weakens. Mental sharpness that is not exercised dulls. The body knows this. The mind knows this. And legacy obeys this absolutely. You cannot maintain influence without maintaining growth. And you cannot maintain growth without daily discomfort. Let me be clear about what I mean by discomfort. I am not speaking of reckless suffering or unnecessary pain. I am speaking of deliberate resistance. The decision to do what is harder when easier is available. This could be physical, exercising when your body prefers rest. This could be mental, studying when your mind prefers distraction. This could be emotional, confronting a difficult conversation when avoidance is simpler. The form matters less than the principle. You must, every single day, do something that requires more than yesterday required. I call this the law of daily expansion. Growth is not an event. It is a posture. The man who expands daily, even slightly, becomes unrecognizable over decades. Not because he made one heroic leap, but because he made 10,000 small advances that compounded into capacity no single effort could produce. Consider Thomas Edison. His legacy is not the light bulb alone. His legacy is the man he became through 10,000 failed attempts. Each failure enlarged his patience. Each setback sharpened his problem solving. Each obstacle expanded his tolerance for uncertainty. By the time success arrived, he was no longer the man who started the experiment. He had grown into someone capable of receiving what the earlier version of himself could not have sustained. This is a truth most men miss. Life does not give you what you want. It gives you what you can handle. And your capacity to handle is determined by how much resistance you have metabolized. The man who avoids discomfort remains small. The man who seeks discomfort daily becomes large enough that life must eventually yield to him. Abraham Lincoln did not inherit leadership. He earned it through repeated defeat. Every political loss deepened his humility. Every personal tragedy expanded his empathy. Every public humiliation refined his restraint. By the time history placed the weight of a fractured nation on his shoulders, he had already been stretched to fit the burden. Comfort would have ruined him. Struggle prepared him. Now let me address the illusion that destroys most legacies, the belief that you have arrived. The moment a man believes growth is complete, decline begins. There is no plateau in life. You are either advancing or retreating. Maintenance is a myth. What is not actively improved is passively eroded. Time does not pause. It compounds either growth or decay. The only question is which you are feeding daily. Legacy men remain students forever. They do not mistake experience for mastery. They do not confuse competence with completion. They refine. They adjust. They deepen. And that humility keeps them alive long after others calcify into routine. The world remembers learners because learners remain useful. Static men become relics. Here is what happens when you push past comfort daily. Your threshold rises. What felt impossible last year becomes routine this year. What required enormous effort 6 months ago now requires only moderate effort. This is not because the task changed. It is because you changed. You expanded. And expansion, repeated daily, creates a gap between you and the version of yourself that accepted limits. Others perceive this, even when they cannot articulate it. They see calm where others show strain. They sense strength that does not announce itself. They feel certainty that does not require validation. This is not arrogance. This is the quiet confidence of a man who has tested himself daily and knows, through evidence, that he can endure more than comfort ever promised him. Let me give you the daily act. Identify one thing today that you would rather avoid and do it anyway. Not recklessly, not foolishly, but deliberately. This could be a difficult email, a challenging workout, an honest conversation, a skill you have been postponing. The specific task matters less than the repetition. What matters is that you train yourself daily to choose resistance over ease. When you do this consistently, something shifts at the identity level. You stop seeing yourself as someone who waits for the right moment. You become someone who creates the moment through action. You stop negotiating with discomfort. You expect it. You welcome it. Because you have learned, through repetition, that discomfort is not a warning, it is confirmation. Confirmation that you are growing. This is where faith operates at its highest level. Not belief in the supernatural, but belief in process. Faith is continued action without immediate evidence. It is the refusal to retreat simply because results delay. And that faith grows stronger with every day you push past comfort. Because every day proves that you are capable of more than comfort suggested. Let me be direct. Pain paid early is tuition. Pain delayed is penalty. The man who accepts small discomforts daily prevents catastrophic regret later. The man who avoids discomfort daily accumulates a debt that time will collect with interest. And when time collects, it does not negotiate terms. I have seen men reach the final years of life and realize, with crushing clarity, that they spent decades fleeing the very resistance that would have made them great. They chose ease when hardship was available. They chose distraction when discipline was possible. And now, at the end, they faced the ultimate discomfort, the knowledge that they were capable of more and chose less. This is the regret that cannot be undone. You can recover from failure. You can rebuild from loss. But you cannot recover wasted capacity. You cannot reclaim years spent in comfort when those years should have been spent in expansion. Time does not rewind. It only reveals whether you used it or squandered it. So here is the principle that must govern your daily conduct. I grow through resistance. I seek discomfort because it enlarges me. I accept challenge as invitation, not obstacle. When this becomes your internal law, growth becomes automatic. You no longer debate whether to do the hard thing. You simply do it. And the accumulated result of 1,000 hard things, done daily, is a man who cannot be ignored. Let me paint the contrast clearly. The ordinary man seeks ease. He optimizes for comfort. He arranges his life to minimize friction. And every year, he becomes smaller. His world contracts. His capacity diminishes. His influence fades. By the end, he leaves behind nothing but the record of his retreat. The legacy man seeks expansion. He optimizes for growth. He arranges his life to encounter resistance. And every year, he becomes larger. His capacity expands. His influence deepens. His presence becomes undeniable. By the end, he leaves behind momentum that continues long after his hands are still. One life evaporates. The other echoes. And the difference is not talent, not opportunity, not luck. The difference is daily decision. The decision to push past comfort when comfort is seductive. The decision to choose growth when ease is available. The decision to become more today than you were yesterday, regardless of how subtle that increment appears. Here is what you must understand. Discipline today saves decades tomorrow. Every day you expand yourself, you reduce the cost of future correction. 1 year of deliberate discomfort prevents 10 years of regret. The arithmetic is exact. The law is fair. And the man who obeys it compounds strength while others compound excuses. This is the fourth daily act. Push past comfort. Not recklessly, not randomly, but deliberately. Choose one thing today that enlarges you. Do it without negotiation. Do it without drama. Do it because growth, not comfort, is your standard. And let that daily choice become the engine that builds a man too large for life to overlook. When you do this long enough, you do not fear the end of life. You do not fear judgment. You do not fear being forgotten. Because you know, with certainty, that you used your years fully. You grew when you could have coasted. You expanded when you could have contracted. You became more when less was acceptable. And that, above all else, is the foundation of legacy, the compounding law of daily discipline. Now let me show you how these 4 acts work together. Because this is not a menu where you select one and ignore the rest. This is a system. Each act reinforces the others. Each discipline strengthens the foundation of the next. And when practiced together, daily, over years, they create a momentum that becomes nearly impossible to stop. The man who governs his thought wakes with clarity. That clarity allows him to see where service is needed. That service, rendered daily, builds trust and opens pathways. Those pathways require direction to navigate effectively. And direction, when clear, reveals exactly where discomfort must be embraced to advance. The 4 acts form a cycle. Break one link, and the entire system weakens. Honor all 4, and you create a life that builds itself. Let me walk you through what this looks like in practice. You wake. Before you touch your phone, before you absorb the world's chaos, you govern your mind. You take mental inventory. You dismiss thoughts that do not serve your aim. You reaffirm what you are building. You establish your inner posture. This takes minutes, but it sets the trajectory of the entire day. From that governed state, you move into the world with awareness. You encounter a colleague who needs guidance. You do not calculate whether helping them benefits you immediately. You help because contribution is your standard. You serve without scorekeeping. That act plants invisible credit with life itself. You do not see the return today, but you have added to an account that will pay when you need it most. As you move through the day, distractions appear. Opportunities that sound appealing but do not align with your direction. Because you reaffirmed your aim this morning, you recognize them instantly as noise. You decline without guilt. You remain on course. That directional clarity saves you from wandering down paths that lead nowhere. At some point, discomfort presents itself. A difficult conversation, a challenging project, a physical demand. Your instinct is to delay. But because you have committed to daily expansion, you recognize discomfort as invitation. You lean into it. You do the hard thing. And in doing so, you expand your capacity slightly. That expansion, though small today, compounds over weeks into noticeable growth. This is one day. Now extend that across 365 days. Then across 10 years. The man who practices these 4 acts daily becomes unrecognizable. Not because of one heroic moment, but because of 10,000 unremarkable choices that compounded into extraordinary capacity. Here is what most men misunderstand about legacy. They believe it requires grand gestures, historic moments, public recognition. In truth, legacy requires the opposite. It requires private discipline repeated so consistently that it becomes identity. And identity, sustained long enough, becomes influence that outlives you. The world does not remember the man who succeeded once. It remembers the man who showed up daily. Not with fanfare, not with announcement, just with steady, reliable presence that others could depend on. That presence is not charisma. It is character. And character is built in repetitions no one sees. Let me address time directly. You may be thinking, I don't have time for 4 daily disciplines. That thought reveals the exact problem. You believe time is something you have or don't have. In truth, time is something you create through priority. The man who says he has no time for daily discipline is confessing that discipline is not his priority. And if discipline is not his priority, legacy is impossible. Because legacy is the fruit of disciplined time, invested daily over decades. These 4 acts do not require hours. They require minutes and intention. 5 minutes to govern your mind. Moments throughout the day to serve without scorekeeping. One clear statement of direction in the morning. One deliberate act of discomfort before the day ends. Total time investment, less than 30 minutes. Time cost over 40 years, negligible. Time saved through clarity, efficiency, and avoided regret, incalculable. The man who invests 30 minutes daily into these disciplines gains hours weekly through improved decision-making. He gains days monthly through avoided mistakes. He gains years over a lifetime through compounded clarity. The math is not debatable. Discipline is not expensive. It is profitable beyond measure. Now let me show you what happens when you neglect these acts. The man who does not govern his mind begins each day reactive. He absorbs chaos and calls it news. He entertains fear and calls it awareness. He rehearses problems and calls it preparation. By noon, he is mentally exhausted, not from productive thought, but from undirected mental noise. The man who does not serve without scorekeeping becomes transactional. He measures every act by immediate return. He withholds effort when recognition is absent. Over time, people sense this. They stop trusting him. They stop leaning on him. He wonders why opportunities pass him by, never realizing that he trained others not to rely on him. The man who does not reaffirm direction daily begins to drift. Small distractions accumulate into major detours. He wakes up 5 years later and cannot explain how he got so far off course. He was busy. He was productive by some measures. But he was not building. He was wandering. The man who does not push past comfort daily begins to shrink. His world becomes smaller. His tolerance for challenge decreases. His confidence erodes. Eventually, he avoids anything that requires effort. And in avoiding effort, he becomes irrelevant. The world moves past him because he stopped moving forward. One clear statement of direction in the morning. One deliberate act of discomfort before the day ends. Total time investment, less than 30 minutes. Time cost over 40 years, negligible. Time saved through clarity, efficiency, and avoided regret, incalculable. The man who invests 30 minutes daily into these disciplines gains hours weekly through improved decision-making. He gains days monthly through avoided mistakes. He gains years over a lifetime through compounded clarity. The math is not debatable. Discipline is not expensive. It is profitable beyond measure. Now let me show you what happens when you neglect these acts. The man who does not govern his mind begins each day reactive. He absorbs chaos and calls it news. He entertains fear and calls it awareness. He rehearses problems and calls it preparation. By noon, he is mentally exhausted, not from productive thought, but from undirected mental noise. The man who does not serve without scorekeeping becomes transactional. He measures every act by immediate return. He withholds effort when recognition is absent. Over time, people sense this. They stop trusting him. They stop leaning on him. He wonders why opportunities pass him by, never realizing that he trained others not to rely on him. The man who does not reaffirm direction daily begins to drift. Small distractions accumulate into major detours. He wakes up 5 years later and cannot explain how he got so far off course. He was busy. He was productive by some measures. But he was not building. He was wandering. The man who does not push past comfort daily begins to shrink. His world becomes smaller. His tolerance for challenge decreases. His confidence erodes. Eventually, he avoids anything that requires effort. And in avoiding effort, he becomes irrelevant. The world moves past him because he stopped moving forward. But hope without discipline is fantasy. Desire without daily action is delusion. The world does not remember what you meant to do. It remembers what you did. Consistently. Daily. Over decades. Here is what separates the men who are remembered from the men who are replaced. The willingness to live deliberately when living by default would be easier. The discipline to choose growth when comfort is seductive. the commitment to serve when recognition is absent, the courage to govern their own minds when the world is screaming for their attention. These are not extraordinary men. They are ordinary men who made extraordinary choices daily. They did not wait for permission. They did not wait for perfect conditions. They did not wait for inspiration. They decided once, and then they renewed that decision every single day, especially on the days they did not feel like it. Let me tell you what happens when you live this way for 10 years. You become someone you do not fully recognize. Not because you changed suddenly, but because you accumulated so many small improvements that the sum total transformed you. Your thinking is sharper. Your presence is steadier. Your judgment is clearer. Your influence is deeper. And people respond to you differently, not because you demanded it, but because you earned it through 10,000 daily acts they never saw. At 20 years, the gap between you and the man who lived by default becomes a chasm. He is still reacting. You are directing. He is still seeking validation. You are creating value. He is still discovering himself. You have built yourself, and the world treats you accordingly. Doors open without announcement. Opportunities arrive without application. Respect appears without solicitation. Not because you were lucky, because you were consistent. At 40 years, you have something that cannot be purchased, inherited, or faked. A body of work that speaks louder than any resume. A reputation built on evidence, not marketing. A legacy that exists independent of your presence because it lives in the people you served, the principles you demonstrated, and the standard you maintained when no one was enforcing it. This is what I mean by legacy. Not fame, not monuments, not your name on a building. Legacy is continuation. It is the part of you that keeps working after your hands are still. It is the influence that moves through decisions, habits, and lives long after your voice is silent. And it is built or destroyed one day at a time. Now let me speak to the man who is reading this and feeling regret. Perhaps you have wasted years. Perhaps you drifted when you should have directed. Perhaps you chose comfort when growth was available. Perhaps you are looking at decades behind you and seeing missed opportunity instead of built momentum. Here is what you must understand. Regret is only useful if it produces change. If it produces only sorrow, it is poison. You cannot reclaim lost time. You cannot undo past neglect. But you can stop the bleeding today. You can begin governing your mind this morning. You can serve someone this afternoon. You can reaffirm your direction tomorrow. You can push past comfort before the week ends. And if you do this daily from this point forward, you will be astonished at how much ground you can recover. Time does not care how old you are. It only cares what you do with what remains. A man who begins disciplined living at 50 and maintains it for 20 years will leave more behind than a man who drifted for 70. Age is not the variable. Discipline is. And discipline, started today, compounds just as powerfully whether you are 25 or 55. But you must start. Not tomorrow. Not when conditions improve. Today. Because every day you delay is another day the world will not remember. And the brutal arithmetic of life is this. Procrastination does not pause time. It wastes it. And wasted time is the one resource you can never recover. Let me give you a final framework to carry forward. At the end of each day, before you sleep, ask yourself 4 questions. Did I govern my mind today, or did the world govern it? Did I serve someone without measuring return? Did I move toward my stated direction, or did I wander? Did I do something uncomfortable that enlarged me? For questions, honest answers. This daily audit keeps you aligned when drift is easier. If you can answer yes to all 4, you have invested the day well. If you answer no to any, you know exactly where to focus tomorrow. This is not about perfection. This is about trajectory. Perfection is impossible. Trajectory is everything. And trajectory, maintained daily over years, determines whether you arrive at the end with evidence or only excuses. Here is the truth I leave you with. You will die. I will die. Every person reading this will, at some point, take their final breath. That moment is not negotiable. But what happens after that moment is entirely within your control right now. Will people speak your name with respect because you built something worth continuing? Will your principles outlive you because you live them daily? Will your influence ripple forward because you were useful, disciplined, directed, and growing until the end? Or will you vanish quietly, remembered only by a few who will themselves soon be gone, leaving behind nothing but the faint record of a life spent reacting, collecting, drifting, and contracting? The choice is not dramatic. It is daily. It is made in the morning when you decide what thoughts to entertain. It is made in the afternoon when you choose to serve without credit. It is made in the evening when you reaffirm your direction instead of collapsing into distraction. It is made in the moment when discomfort appears and you choose growth over ease. These choices seem small. Individually, they are. But compounded across 10,000 days, they build a man the world cannot ignore. Not because he was talented, not because he was lucky, because he was obedient. Obedient to laws that govern growth, influence, and continuation. Laws that do not negotiate, do not pause, and do not care about excuses. If you adopt these 4 daily acts, governing your mind, serving without scorekeeping, reaffirming direction, and pushing past comfort, you will not need to chase legacy. You will build it, quietly, steadily, irreversibly. And when your time comes, you will not face the end with regret. You will face it with evidence. Evidence that you were here. Evidence that you mattered. Evidence that something continues because you existed. This is not motivational rhetoric. This is architectural law. Your life is being built right now. The question is not whether you will leave something behind. You will. The question is whether it will be intentional or accidental. Significant or forgettable, useful or invisible. Decide now, not someday. Now, because now is the only time you have. And what you do with it, daily, will determine what remains of you when your name is spoken for the last time. The 4 acts are before you. The choice is in your hands. And the clock, as always, is running. Build deliberately. Serve consistently. Direct yourself daily. Grow relentlessly, and let time do what time always does for the man who lived with intention. Remember him.